Okay. So, you've probably heard that whenever we conduct an experiment, it always starts with a question that's driving the experiment. The question that we're going to use for this primer, for example, how might temperature affect the functioning of an enzyme? Okay, so that's the question that we're going to be starting with. And the enzyme that we're going to be focusing on for this experiment and this primer is an enzyme that you learned about in the Bozeman video last week called catalase. So catalase is an enzyme that prevents the buildup of something called hydrogen peroxide. Or H2O2 inside the cell. And the way that it does that is it catalyzes a reaction that turns H2O2 into H2O and oxygen. Okay. So the way that we can think about this is we can measure the rates at which catalase is functioning by measuring the amount of products that are being formed. Okay, so if we think about this question, there's a couple different terms that we identify for our experiment. So first term is called an independent variable. Second one is our dependent variable. And then the third one is called a constant variable, and there's usually multiple. And it's said that the purpose of an experiment is to test for a connection between our independent variable and our dependent variable. The whole purpose of an experiment is you're trying to see, is there a connection, a causative relationship between the independent and dependent variable. Okay, our independent variable is the thing that we will actually be changing or manipulating. We call this the manipulated variable. Our dependent variable is what we are measuring. And our constant variables are those variables that we are keeping the same throughout the experiment. And this helps us to focus on the connection between the independent and the dependent variable. Okay. So in this experiment, the thing that will be changing is temperature. We are altering temperature to test its effect on the functioning of an enzyme. Now, with an independent variable, you can have multiple levels. All right, so in this case, we're going to be testing multiple temperatures But what we'll always be measuring is the functioning of the enzyme, which in this case is the same thing as saying the rates of reaction or product formation, right? So how much product is being formed. Now the things that we're going to want to keep constant so that we can focus on that connection, there's a couple different things. So we want to keep, for example, the amount of catalase enzyme constant. We want to keep the amount of substrates, which, what is the substrate being acted upon by catalase? Hydrogen peroxide, right? That's what's actually being acted upon. We want to keep that constant. And some other things that we could keep constant would be like the same pH. Same level of pH across all of the experiment. Okay. All right. So, what you'll see is that you have experimental groups and you have control groups. And within our control group, we tend to have a positive control and a negative control. An experimental group, again, we can have multiple levels. I'm going to create, let's say, 3 levels. Okay. So, the experimental group, we are changing the independent variable, the IV, independent variable. So in this scenario, let's say this first level, I'm going to conduct the experiment at 20 degrees Celsius. Second level, 50 degrees Celsius, and the last level, 70. Those are arbitrary numbers, but they're different levels where I'm changing the temperature. All 3 of these, I will have catalase plus hydrogen peroxide in the same amount. Now the control group, these are typically we refer to as our normal conditions, or things that we can predict their outcome. And so the positive control, this is where you run a trial with an expected result. So in this case, a positive control would be catalase plus hydrogen peroxide at 37 degrees Celsius, which is the temperature that catalase normally operates under. Which is body temperature. And for the negative control, this would either be no catalase. Actually, we'll just leave it as no catalase. Plus hydrogen peroxide. is actually the same thing. We're running a trial with an expected result, but it's different. Okay, so we will finish this tomorrow. Again, make sure that you take some time to read the protocol. Again, all those files are uploaded to Steward. So again, we'll finish this tomorrow. We'll talk about positive and negative controls some more. But you can pack up. Have a good rest of your day. And I'll see you tomorrow.